It's 8:01, so we're going to get started. And folks, thank you for those of you who are returning. We're into season 3, season 4. Do we have seasons, Jenny?
No, we don't have seasons because then
Okay.
we get old. We're not
Yes, there
doing
you go. Yeah. But this is episode, I believe, 71, 72. We never thought 2.5, 3 years ago when we started this with 80 folks and 50 of them from SAIT, and I think a couple of our parents on the very first episode way back when, that we would still be here. But for those of you who are new, we thought we would take a moment to introduce ourselves. And so I'm Craig Hess. I'm the Director of Individual Learning, Corporate Training, and International Training here at SAIT. Work with a group that is very proud and happy to bring training and upgrading and upskilling solutions to individuals and organizations, whether they're here in Calgary or around the world.
Yes, and I am Jenny, and I work on that team. Excuse me, Jenny Gilbert. So part of my life is with Craig and his team as a leadership development specialist, and the other parts of my life is in the actual classrooms and as a facilitator for a whole host of different conversations. Part of our, excuse me, Friday morning, part of our usual program ritual, if you like, I think we can talk ritual as part of our culture, is to start our Fridays with a pause and just recognizing where we are. So this photo I took this week when I was on campus, that is the view from one of our main buildings, Heritage Hall of Calgary, once known as Mokintis, which is the Indigenous word for the meeting of two rivers. So the Bow River meets the Elbow River in Calgary. And you can see with the TP there on the left-hand side, we are set up for the new academic school year that starts in September, and many, many new beginnings and a new series for us here as well. So when we pause to recognize that we are meeting together, learning together, in our case, quite a bit of laughing together, we also like to recognize with importance that SAIT is situated on the traditional territories of the Nisisqueppy, the Blackfoot Nations, and the people of Treaty 7. That includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda of Bears Paw, the Chiniki, and the Goodstoney. Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation people of Alberta. There we go. Thanks, Craig.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. As always, so very well done, and an important way to start our morning. I think what we're going to do just quickly is just kind of do some housekeeping for anybody who might be new joining us. And as a reminder for folks who have been with us before, we really want to focus these sessions on Friday morning on your questions, your interaction, what you bring to the conversation. Everything here that we're recording, you will get a link to the recording following the session. We take the audio and we put it into a podcast version as well, should you want to listen to us while you're out walking your bobcats or chasing your dog away. But just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that you will get a copy of the recording and that there will be ways to listen going forward. Lots of you have found the chat, and that chat flows past my screen here just like a waterfall. And there's lots of great conversation that always happens there. We're very appreciative of the comments, and we occasionally do pick up on them as they fly past. If you end up with a specific question that you want to make sure that we try and answer, please pop it into the Q&A. So on your Zoom screen, at least on my Zoom screen, the button next to the chat button at the bottom is the Q&A button, and you can populate that into the Q&A, and we will make sure that we address those either live or in written format as a follow-up. There's our housekeeping. Ooh. So my question for everybody here today, and just I will pop, as we get going, I will just pop a quick thing into the chat for you all as we go forward. But you got it, Robin. That's the place where you put your questions. You got it. My question for everybody here is, why was this your priority this morning, since we were talking about prioritization? What were you hoping to hear? Why was this the session? You know, we're very lucky that you chose to spend some time with us. Why did you want to join us this morning? And please just pop it in the chat, and we'll Well, we missed you too, Tanya.
We did.
But if there's anything specific that you are hoping as we look at prioritization, as we look at how do you have more than one priority, that's a question I think maybe that we can get to, Jenny.
Hmm.
Um, the fact that priorities is a word that exists is an interesting one.
And it's only existed for what, about a couple of, I suppose it's a couple of decades now, but it was very much singular, wasn't it? Priority.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually heard a term this week that was fascinating. And somebody said to me, well, we're now leaning into rigorous prioritization. And the conversation that followed is like, how did we get to rigorous prioritization? Like priorities, now we have to be rigorous. We've very much created a, what do they call it? A more is more environment, society. It's constant. And the bit that's a little bit scary is what we hear though is we're doing more with less, a lot less, and still throwing that more and more on. And so the piles are growing, and actually I think the amount not getting done is growing too. It's a really confusing cycle.
Absolutely. So just scrolling through here, managing my time better, managing priorities that flex and change on a rapid basis. I think we've all faced that. Learn how to prioritize work-life balance. I'm just quickly scrolling through. Shifting priorities or originating from different sources. Yeah, how many of us have to deal with the priority of somebody else that suddenly lands in your lap as a priority for you to take on? So
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of ways that we can tackle this, Jenny. Just sorry, one other question or one other comment that caught my eye here. I work for an organization that needs leadership improvement from top to bottom. I'm hoping to gain some leadership advice and knowledge. That's perfect. We hope we're able to answer some of that. So Jenny, I think where I wanted to start here, I think we're aligned a lot with what we heard in the chat is how can we have priorities? I think we need to lean into that one fact to start with. The fact that the word priority can be pluralized now. Where do we go from there?
Right, really, we can't, can we?
No.
And I think there begins the conversation, because the boundaries never ever got set. And so because we were able to expand, if we look at transformation, growth, everything else, and our absolute addiction to, it's almost a buzz of being indispensable. It's the badge of busy. We've talked about that quite a bit before. Like, we wear that badge of busy with an honor, and you listen to people, and hands up in here, actually guilty a lot of the time. My calendar's back to back. I've got no space. And in my world, actually, it's quite healthy if my calendar's back to back, because that means I'm with people and we're helping them. But in other worlds, when your calendar is back to back, you spend the entire day talking and not necessarily doing any work. So there's all sorts of competing commitments alongside that real buzz of feeling indispensable, feeling like you're constantly busy and important. And I think the big word in here that's kind of difficult to get your head around is that there's an emotional labor. Like, it's hard to actually slow down, set the boundaries, recognize what's important, and then move forward in that far more narrow focused, prioritized world.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time we fail to recognize that if everything's a priority, nothing's actually a priority. Like, we're back to square one.
Yeah, no, and for me, prioritization is about focus,
Yeah.
right? To your point, um, we are busier than ever. There's this badge of honor that I think some people take on by, being able to claim to multitask effectively
Mm.
and manage multiple projects.
Yeah.
They want to take on work, perhaps to prove themselves, so to speak. They want to take on work because they want to be seen as helpful. And I think sometimes folks take it on because they see it perhaps as a sense of job security. There's some things to unpack in that, but I think the key thing that we really should try and focus on is how do we help people prioritize. And we can think about this from two lenses, right? You as a contributor, whether you're an individual contributor or you're a leader who has to produce results, or as a leader who has to help their team
Mm-hmm.
prioritize or has to set the direction and focus for their team. I'm going to have some added satiation from saying priority or prioritization so many times. The word is starting to just sound like a sound, but
There's so much in there. Uh, so you know, first off, I think something for anybody and everybody, it doesn't matter whether you're a leader or you're or you're an individual contributor stepping into leadership. For those new, we talk about this all the time. Leadership's a behavior, leaders a role. So this all goes across the board. But the sort of story adage that I heard once, it's quite useful, is if you consider yourself you and your boat, and your job is to make your boat go forwards, and the speed that it goes forwards is up to you, but what you take on in your boat determines whether you'll move forward, stay still, or actually sink. And so there is a lot of personal responsibility in here as well. There's a lot of ownership. And that's really hard for people, because that means at times we're going to have to say no. And how do we say no? Because along with our busy culture, we also work in a culture where we're very nice. And I often joke, like, Canadians will say sorry just for walking past you in the street. Well, that's kind of what we do. I'd apologize for that. So we work in a very nice sort of culture. And so saying no often feels like we're being combative or we're being rude. So we have to get our head around, how do we say no? Where do we say no? And I think that's where a leader comes in. You can't prioritize if you don't have a clear strategy. Like, really, prioritization starts with your strategy. And when you say this is our priority, what you're really saying is, this is what we really care about. This is where our focus is. This is where we're going to invest time, money, resources, whatever that is. And to that extent, this is going to take priority over something else. So there's a trade-off, and we don't talk about those trade-offs. And if as leaders, we don't talk about those trade-offs, the people who work for us are now confused, because this is the priority and it has to get done, but all of this is still on my list too. So do I do everything? And we see it all the time, people trying to do everything because nobody said, we're not doing that because we're prioritizing that.
yeah, 100%. And you touched on something that I saw in the chat earlier, and that is, how do you say no without sounding negative?
Mm-hmm.
Right? To your point, no can be seen as combative, can be seen as rude or disrespectful.
Yeah.
But I think there's some personal courage perhaps it takes if you're not used to being able to say, no, that's actually not a priority for me right now. I don't know if we want to dive into that a little bit. It gets into boundary setting, which is an entirely different conversation, but
It is. But I think two things, maybe three, you know me. So the first thing is, for people to remember, you're saying no to a task, not no to the other person. And so, we get very emotionally connected to this because we're emotionally connected to other people, maybe to the task, but not so much. So you're saying no to the task, not to the person. Let's identify that first of all. The second thing that I think is really useful, and think back to that boat part. Do you want your boat to move forward with speed, or are you going to sink? If I say yes to you, I'm saying no to myself. Am I okay with that? No. And then the third one is, if it's a work case, let's say, well, I work for you and I've got all this going on, and you say, okay, Jenny, we need this done. And it may be as simple as, Craig, there's A and there's B. I cannot or won't do both. We can talk about the difference between can't and won't as well, but I can't do both. Which one takes priority? And at that point, as a leader, that's your role. Yeah, Jenny, focus on this one. And the part that makes me feel a little bit twitchy is those leaders that say, well, actually, you need to do both.
mm-hmm.
And now we're into care and diligence and all the rest, which is another conversation too.
Yeah, 100%. Although I'd suggest your example of using letters to, like, an ingenious leader might say, well, we can make a word out of those letters, Jenny, when you say whether it should be. Anyway,
yes, because we work at SAFE, and acronyms are everything that we do.
Yeah, well, it's safe to say the dad jokes haven't left me over the summer. I guess the other thing that I saw come through here, and maybe this is a comment around perhaps getting into strategies around how we help
Mhm.
people prioritize. Eisenhower matrix, I think I saw float past a
Mhm.
couple of times in the conversation. And, we do like to provide tools, tips, tricks, ideas. There's so many ways of prioritizing.
Yeah. So I think actually for people who are here, if you go back to one of our earlier episodes, similar title, not the same, you'll see a slide in there with the Eisenhower matrix. I believe I've walked through this one time before. Most people will be familiar. And the interesting thing, this is very, like, it's a useful tool in the time management books that are coming out now. It's still the same language. And so there in the matrix, we talk about important and urgent. And I think the only different version I've seen is Greg McKeown's essentialism, essential and non-essential. It's kind of the same thing. That I don't want to do disservice there because Greg McKeown's work is excellent. So if you think of a quadrant, you've got the 4 quadrants and they're based on what is urgent and important. There's quadrant 1. That's the whirlwind. That's the part that makes us feel busy. Some people love that world. That's the other thing to be aware of as a leader. If you love that urgency and that importance piece, be really aware that the rest of your team may not be as
Yeah.
sort of familiar and happy with it. We call it urgency addiction. And the other part, you can opt to work in that box. Anybody who works for emergency services, call centers, that's kind of that box for real. Do make sure that you're getting the breaks and the time out, because burnout is really, really likely in there. And if you think of that as in a quadrant, if that's your top left box, if you slide down into what would be quadrant 3 in the Eisenhower matrix, now everything is urgent, but it's no longer important. So we go from business affects our goals, our strategy, our objectives, whatever you're working by. When you slide into just urgent, you've kind of hit that world of busyness, and it's simply busy. It's not important. That's where you fight fires. That's where you attend meetings where you're really not crucial to the conversation. You're not getting that hour back, and that hour could have gone into something that was important. That's where we feel like we're running on the hamster wheel for no reason. Like there's nothing important in there, and you can get stuck in there quite quickly, especially if you spread yourself very thin in all directions. And then on the other side of the quadrant, so top right would be quadrant 2. That's important but not urgent. That's the most important box. There's your effective work, but it's quite hard to get in there because it's not urgent. And so important, we have to act on it. Urgency will always act on you. If you're listening to us right now and an email's come in, you'll have switched and looked at your email, or your phone's buzzed. You'll look at urgency acts on us. But the important things, and those are things like figuring out what your focus is, you're building relationships, learning, growing, all of that stuff belongs in quadrant 2. And those are the things that actually elevate us and help us to grow and move forward. But we have to make the time for them. And then the 4th quadrant fits into not urgent and not important. And so Covey, who really brought this to the forefront, used to say that's the stop it box. And so, like, just don't go there, don't do it. Gossip, time wasting, a lot of social media, those kind of things. And people get a little bit confused because you do need some of those in moderation. There's our break for most of us, but we don't want to get caught in there because that's going to achieve nothing for you. There you go.
Yeah. 100%. The big thing I took from that was, and it's been picked up in the chat, urgency will act on you.
Always.
Important is like that is that there's our t-shirt from today. I think we could look at question. And I think for me, this ties in a little bit with, what the leader's role is around providing clarity, setting expectation, pointing to strategy. I'll make the connection here. Is how do you manage people differences in expectations on how long and how in-depth work takes, helping those prioritize. I think the task would take 2 hours and they think would take 4 hours. What does that trigger for you?
Well, that's a good question. And it's interesting. You've really got to know your people. And it depends on the work too, because in some situations, there's so many different avenues. In some situations, we have a leader who is promoted because they used to be good at the job. So they got promoted to take care of the people who do the job. And in that case, you may have some experience and knowledge of how long it took you to do the job. And not everybody works like you. So part of being a leader is adapting to the people who are working with you. It is not about them necessarily adapting to you. There's a bit of both ways in there.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that proves more useful here is, are we really clear on what finished looks like or what success looks like? And so we talk in terms of value, contribution, outcomes. If we have those clearly outlined, then we know what we're looking for. And if it takes you 2 hours and then 4 hours, let's take a realistic look at experience, skills, and quality. Are they looking at the same version of finished as you're looking at? And so a really sort of layman's example, you might ask me for a report, Craig, on, I don't know, clients A, B, and C. And in my head, I've now got pages, it's beautifully formatted. I'm going to build it as a slide doc so you can print it as a PDF and share it. Really what you wanted was a couple of paragraphs. If we haven't had that conversation, that will take me 2 hours and you're expecting 20 minutes. And
Yeah.
so most of it comes, as you said at the very beginning in there, let's get really clear about the outcomes and make sure that they're cascading downwards. With
Yeah,
me.
I think that is for me the most important piece out of this. And what you touched on earlier is perhaps the difference in experience
Mm-hmm.
between you as the leader assigning the work and the individual that is taking on the work. Is this the first time they've done something like this?
Mm-hmm.
If so, it probably is going to take them much longer than you think it should take. Are you focused on the process that they're using, or are you focused on the outcome?
Yeah.
Right? Just because you would do it a certain way doesn't mean that's the way it has to be done. Right? And I think you have to let employees find their way to that, especially if it's new. If you're assigning work that should be simple and repetitive and easy to do, why don't you have a procedure set up for, here's the procedure, follow it, and give me the results. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some work a leader needs to take and some responsibility there. But to your point, we're all stuck in that busy, urgent whirlwind. Do we often stop and think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's we've had the conversation about intentionality as a leader before, and the fact that you do have to slow down and be intentional
Mm-hmm.
and take the time and say, here's what I want to see, or here's what I need. How do you think you might get there?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly, Keith. You can lead them to water, but don't think for them. So I think the other thing too, when I think about prioritization, what's the point of having this conversation if it's not to actually get something done at the end of it? It's great to have priorities, right? It's great to create your list of key things that has to happen. We need to focus on this. But preparing to do the thing isn't doing the thing, and scheduling time to do the thing isn't doing the thing, and talking to people about doing the thing isn't actually doing the thing, right? Reading about how to do the thing isn't doing the thing. So if you're going to prioritize, ultimately, aren't we talking about putting resources in place to take action? Like prioritization without action, for me, just doesn't seem to matter too much, does it?
It doesn't. And now we're going into the world of procrastination, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
And I asked my son yesterday, I said, okay, so what's your top prioritization tip? And he goes, well, that's simple, Mum. Leave it all till the very last minute, and then you're really focused and you can get it all done straight away. So we need to be aware of that. Like, what is your MO? Like, what is your natural rhythm, your natural cadence? And we're all different. And so sometimes sort of procrastinating on it can be a little productive. And sometimes we have to take that action. And so I think there's a self-awareness part in there. If your procrastination is the sort of true nitty gritty, I'm a little bit lazy, or I don't like those tasks, I'm just going to keep pushing them off, then we've got to talk strategies. How do you get those done? And you can dive down the road. Who was it? Brian Tracy and his Eat the Frog, and get those ugly frogs eaten first thing in the day. And
Yeah.
then you can like there's numerous different ways. There's several strategies that sort of bump to mind. But also as a leader, I think that's important. How many meetings will you have to talk about the action? So really what we're looking for is those, what are the immediate action steps? And we often talk actually about, you know, what's your 1% or your 15% solution? The first thing that will get us towards something happening, because action builds momentum too. And when you've decided that it's a priority and it's a focus, then as we said earlier, you're saying that this is the thing we're investing in. So let's make some traction and some progress on there.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I just think about, it ultimately has to be about productivity. Like, what
Yeah.
is this leading to? You know, to your point, you're helping your team set priority based on your strategy. The strategy conceivably is about putting resources behind achieving an outcome. And so the prioritization has to be part of productivity. And it's interesting how you can't quite get into this conversation without also then falling into time management, procrastination, boundaries, right? You know, you touched on time blocking just by the eat the frog thing, but prioritization isn't all about time blocking, right?
It is, yeah. And actually one thing just before we go, and we can talk time blocking because there's different versions of that too that are extremely helpful, is I think it was Jason Fox I heard talking about this. These two words go beautifully together. What is meaningful progress? And I had the same response. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. And he added to that and said, can we talk about meaningful progress with no data? No numbers, nothing. Like, let's just talk about, as a team, what is meaningful progress? And I think when we start to sort of shift our focus towards, okay, here's our priority, this is where we're going with the strategy, and this is what meaningful progress looks like, sounds like, feels like, wherever you're going to go with that, and then get to those outcomes. Now the team would have an understanding of, okay, these are the competing commitments, these are the trade-offs that we'll have to make, here's the actions that we're going to take. And that gives us clarity on what we can do and where we can do it.
Yeah. Can we dive down the clarity rabbit hole for a second? Because I think there's ultimately that is a leader's job, is to ensure their team is clear about what they're doing. Right. It is, there's probably nothing scarier than a leader of an organization talking to 10 different people and hearing that we're focused on 10 different things. Yes, everybody's going to have their areas of focus, but I think what I'm saying here is that you're getting 10 different versions of the strategy of the group or the strategy of the company. So can you give your thoughts on clarity and the importance of, well, obviously I've just said how it's important, but how does a leader go about this effectively? It's the first episode back, Jenny. My brain is catching up.
Nope, we're on it. We're doing good. It's hard because it is just as it sounds. So I quite like the Brené Brown quote too that runs with everything. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so when we hit clarity, we have to know what the boundaries of that clarity is. We have to know, I think I said this before, what success is, what finished is, but we have to deliver that succinctly. And we often think that succinct and clarity is in our metrics. Here's the results that we're looking for. That doesn't always help people. I can know that 110 is my metric, but I don't know how to get there. And I don't know what to do first to get there. So I think what we want to do is not only sort of cascade the goals or the objectives or whatever it is, but we also need to bring the meaning with that. And the clarity sits in the conversation that says, here's where we're going to get to, and then how are you going to get there? What's your plan that's going to fit in with our strategy? And so clarity for a leader, to go back to what you said, is like check in with yourself before you deliver it. Is it clear? Is it understandable? And once you've talked about it, ask your team if it's clear and if it's understandable. Because we hit that hole, the more you've thought about it, the more you're connected to it, the more you get it. And then when you first tell somebody else, there's that huge knowledge gap, and you have forgotten, you have no idea what it's like to not know. And the worst case scenario is I sit there going, yeah, yeah, and I've got no idea. And if you haven't asked me or checked in with me, how do you know? We don't. We just go off and we all do our thing. And I think that emails are quite important. So I can spend my entire day being productive on an email. Whereas if you had got it back from me, or best case, we've got the psychological safety within the relationships that I can say, Craig, that's not making sense. Like, what are we working on this for? Or what does this mean? That's a productive conversation. And that's one worth being in, so that we can, clarity comes from both sides, I think, is the very short version of that long answer.
Yeah, I know. And I think what you just triggered for me and the leader checking with the individuals on their team, sometimes you got to be careful that you're just not doing that in a group setting. So you talk about it in the team meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And to your point, who knows what was going on in Jenny's head when I was saying this is where we need to focus, this is what we need to do. And you said, yeah, it's going all right over my head because, I have a flat tire on the car in the parking lot that I'm gonna have to change after I leave here, or whatever it might be.
Yep.
So, and some people just don't want to admit, I'm not following you in front of their peers.
No,
So
no,
you need to
that's
think, right? You need to think about that and being able to find ways to check in, perhaps one-on-one. But again, that comes with experience, with time, with knowing your people, um, with all those pieces. There was another question that floated past here, and that is, actually, there's a couple. So what happens when you have a leader that doesn't share their needs and focuses on all others? Well, it's great for them to focus on the team. It's a two-way thing. How do you get there?
the managing up conversation is always a good conversation, and it's actually always really simple, because when we're managing up, it's a human, just like when we go sideways and downwards, it's a human. And so everything is the same. And I think it would be, I'm assuming that the relationship is there. It's a conversation to say, Craig, how are you doing? No, I'm good. I'm fine.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Notice that you're yeah, I've noticed that your concentration is on us, and there's no doubt about it, your world is as busy and as crowded, and offer that conversation. I can't see the question, they go by so fast. It depends. If the leaders focus on the team as a micromanagement basis, that's a whole different gambit. And strange enough, we've had a conversation about that. You can find it in our history. It was a good one, as I remember.
Yeah. Another question here is, how would a leader within government organizations, or I'm going to perhaps say big bureaucratic organizations as well, where priorities can often change with elections, reorgs, public pressures, etc. How do you help bring clarity to the team in an ever-changing work environment? And I think we could probably even expand this out just from government to when you're looking at digital disruption and AI, et cetera. Like, there's a ton of stuff that's changing right now.
Yes. I think, okay, change is our constant. Now, like nowadays, change is the one thing that we have that stays the same. So for leaders, there's massive boom around change management and process and all of those. And I'm not knocking it, but what we often forget is change leadership. And change leadership is very different to change management. And so if you've got a team that's got to deal with that, government is a great example, because you just get going and boom, it can all change in a heartbeat. And so, and actually, to your point, Craig, lots of major organizations, that can be the case as well. So a couple of things that help: ambiguity, not feeling in control, no clear end of sight, are all things that actually drive fear. And fear is never, ever helpful in a workplace. Nobody will perform well if they're in fear or in anxiety, for that matter. And so as a leader, what can we do in that situation? So first of all, recognize it. Like, there's an empathy piece. This is difficult. We're in a turbulent patch. A couple of things that really help is, one, what is still the same? And because when we focus on change, we can see everything that's different, and that feels a little overwhelming. Actually, there's always a lot that's the same. So for the foreseeable future, our team is the same. And the work that we're going to do, and then always narrow it down. So where do you have control over? So for today, this will be our focus. For this week, this is where we're going. For this fortnight, for this month, whatever you can sort of put your hands around and allow that focus for, and those guardrails for. And then I think the other key part in those areas, speak as much as you can speak. So we are held by confidentiality sometimes, and that makes it difficult, but people want to know, people want to feel informed. We always hear transparent and honest. Well, it is transparent and honest to say, I'm actually not at the point where I can disclose any information on X. Here's what I am allowed to put forward.
Yep.
And that's part of your job. And that's difficult for people because nobody likes to feel like they're being kept out. But then at least it allows us a lane that we can take action in. And remember, action actually builds confidence. And so where can you take action? And then I would just bring it back to that.
Yeah, no, I think you touched on a couple of really key things there. The ask me any question and I will either give you three answers: the answer, or the answer that I don't know, or the answer that I know and I can't tell you. Right. So just be prepared for the fact that I may tell you that I can't tell you right now. You
And
might
I
not
think,
like that, right?
yes, and I think the other thing too is managing up, and this isn't managing up, but recognition of whoever you're talking to in that leadership position. It's also difficult for them.
Oh, sure.
It's not nice to be able to say, I can't tell you that.
No.
Like that does not feel good for anybody. And our natural, response is, oh, okay, that's exclusion. You're not. They're not allowed to tell you that. They've probably signed something that says they're not allowed to tell you that. And so we need to empathy backwards as well. Like it's really
Absolutely. And the other thing that it triggered for me was the fact that, and I'm going from the perspective of, if you're trying to deal with change management that you as a leader have been aware of for a while and know is coming, and have had time to think through it, perhaps even be involved in the discussion to make the change. You've processed it. You're good to go. You're right. When your team hears about it, they're just hearing about it.
Yeah.
Right. They need that time to process. They need to be able to move on. So just because you want to make a change and all of a sudden, to tie this back to our topic of the day, this is now the priority, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily Jimmy's priority the second that you tell Jimmy it's now his priority. Yes, it is, but he's got to unload all the other stuff that he was working on mentally and whatever else might be the case before he can start moving forward with you.
Yes.
Right? You have to give that time for them to process. Sometimes, yes, you have to say, you got to process this quickly because we got to get moving. Right.
And if that's the case, then your role as your leader is to support that.
Absolutely.
Like if you have to put that difficult constraint on there, then your job is to support that difficult constraint. And support is very different than direction.
Oh, 100%.
So we need both.
Yeah. You might have to get in the trenches and do some of the work.
Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. A couple things. So we're getting close to the end of our time. This has flown past. A couple things. We touched on time blocking earlier, right? I don't want to make this a time management session, but there is something around, leaders being able to create space for their team to focus on the things that we need to focus on.
Yes.
Right. If you can create that space for them to be able to focus on fewer things, but do it really well. Right. That's kind of the sauce here.
Yes.
So time blocking, empowering your team to time block. A couple things that, that I've been trying lately that I thought I would share, and I know you might be surprised by this, but booking meeting recap time in your calendar as a way to avoid back-to-backs. Right. Yeah. So you got a meeting that goes from 9 to 9:30, book 9:30 to 9:45 automatically in your calendar to mentally process what just happened in that meeting, capture what you need to capture, and move on. I realize some folks may have meetings put in their calendar. I get it. You might not have that luxury. 1-for-ones. So on this, I've started playing with, if somebody books an hour in my calendar, I book an hour somewhere else, hopefully within the week, just as work time.
Right. That's a good
right?
idea. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
idea. I like that one.
And then finding a way for a shutdown at the end of your day, right? How many of us still carry on the mental baggage of the day into dinner, past dinner, etc., versus
Mhm.
actually getting to a set time or a set routine where you are going through your mental garbage can of the day and capturing everything outstanding that you can start focusing on the next day and just trying to shut that day off, so to speak. Sometimes easier said than done.
I think too, like those are excellent, all three of those. And I think adding on to that last one, I really like the last one. Like, how do you finish off your day? And from there, for some people, what's your top five things for the next day? What's
Yeah.
your top five important actions for the next day? And there's different ways of prioritizing those as well. Like, do you put all the quick wins in first of all, or do you put those important things that you have to act on? And
Yeah.
then maybe it's making space in your calendar for the next day when you'll get to work on those as well. Or if your calendar's already squashed up, like where's that work going to happen? How will that work? And the beauty of that, especially if you go to 4 or 5, is if you are running on a very meeting heavy schedule, when you come back to your desk or switch down whatever the meeting is and you look at your to-do list, if you've only got 4 or 5 there, it's very easy to pick what you're going to do. If
Yeah.
you've got 45 or 50 there, you're off to grab coffee or to like you'll something else. And
Yeah.
so tying in that shutdown with what's tomorrow takes a little bit more of that mental clutter out as well. I like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Cool. We've hit the point, Jenny, where we
Oof,
need to wrap up. It's
we have.
8:43. This has flown past, and folks, the chat I have seen just be incredibly active. I can't wait to go back and dig through everything that I missed, which we do. We do take a look just to,
We
we
do.
often learn as much in that conversation as we do in this one. So, Jenny, over to you.
So in our conclusion, every time we get together, we offer what's our big idea? Sometimes it's ours, sometimes it's somebody else's. We borrow as well. So what's our big idea? Then 2 strategies that you could take away and use in addition to everything that we've talked about already. And then 3 questions is the last ask. So 1, 2, 3, if you like. So our big idea this week, you can see it there, and I think we talked about this enough too, is you can't prioritize if you don't have a clear strategy. So for some people, strategy is where we need to start. And I popped down the bottom just because it's occupying brain space for me today. Contemplate that meaningful progress. Can you talk about meaningful progress with no reference to data to start with, and actually spend some time? That is good pause thinking time with the clarity of outcomes and those competing commitments. We have to talk about them out loud. What's the trade-off? What will we not do? So in line with that, this is one that we currently don't have in our time management class at SAIT, but I like it as a sort of helpful prioritization tool. And I picked it up from the Ready. I've seen it in other places as well. And sometimes it's referred to as a Moscow table. They've got some O's in there. Some of you who are familiar with me will be smiling because yes, the words must and should are in there. And I'm usually on a campaign to get rid of those 2 words. But take all your tasks with your team. And what are our must do's? What are our should do's, could do's, and won't do? So a must do is something where if you don't do it, there's a considerable risk to the project, the team, the partner, the organization. So those are your absolute first things for the team. Should do is if you don't do it, there's an opportunity going to be lost. Maybe you'll run late. Maybe you're going to perhaps sort of push a relationship or something. It's valuable to get done, but it doesn't sit with the must-dos. Those are your absolute highest value tasks, the musts and the shoulds. The could-dos in isolation, they're great, but it's okay if they don't get done. And the really important one, I think, in this list is what will we not do? There's a big difference between saying I can't do that and I won't do that. So I think leaders could lean in and be explicit about the trade-offs that are happening for the sake of the priority, the must-dos. And my second one, I think this is curious, and I think we've sort of leaned into this without saying it. Leaders, you have a drumbeat. And it's really essential to think about what your drumbeat is. Are you beating the drum of efficiency? Are you beating the drum of getting more done? Are you beating the metrics drum? Are you just making noise? A lot of leaders that just make noise. So good self-reflection is, are you helping or hindering the prioritization? And to Craig's point earlier, the action that comes with prioritization. So I called it slack time in here as a leader. Make it normal for your team to book that time where they can finish off, catch up, pause, and think. I think we had 3 excellent strategies from Craig just before we came here too, with that purposeful shutting down, the recap after a meeting time. And I've forgotten the other one, but there's another one. It was a good one
One
too.
for one. If
There we go.
somebody books an hour of your time, you book an hour of your own time.
There we go. Thank you. So there's lots of applied strategies in there. And then finally, 3 questions. Some of you are thinking, oh, look at Jenny, she can count. Nope, we never have 3. I'm always going to give you one more, one less, or maybe a few more. So 3 questions just to take away into your Friday. All 4 of these 3 questions are really useful. Pick one. Ask yourself it once or twice today, over the weekend, maybe on Monday, or take them to your team. 1 and 2 are good team conversations as well. And that is it.
Awesome.
There you
Thank
go.
you so much. And folks, yes, the recording, I saw a couple of questions. The recording will be shared. We will be back in a couple of weeks
Yeah.
to address poor performance. So perhaps Jenny will be giving me a talking to on the 27th. I'm not sure. But have yourselves a great weekend. And Jenny, as always, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Take care,
Thank
folks.
you.
We will see
Thank
you
you.
next time.
Have a good weekend, everyone.